Hello and welcome to Property Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin and this is the programme where you can have your property related questions answered by our team of experts. And joining me today for the first time is Scott Marshall, founder of Roma Finance. Welcome to you, Scott.
Thank you very much. Nice to be here.
Good. Hope you had a good trip down. And joining Scott is John Reynolds, who's been with us many times before, property developer and investor. Welcome to you, John.
Thanks, Stephen.
Hope you had a good trip up too. Right, we're going to get straight on with the questioning, and Scott, you're going first. When applying for development finance, is it better to apply to a lender in the same geographical area as the proposed development? I'm thinking perhaps that a local lender may have a better appreciation of relevant market conditions and the general economic climate. What do you think?
It's a great question. I think the best way to think of it is the most important person to have local market knowledge is the developer themselves. And from the developer's perspective, the most important thing that they want to have with a lender, a good lender, is a relationship where they feel that the lender is a partner in their project. And I don't think it necessarily matters where the lender's headquartered. The most important thing is that they can build a relationship with people that are on the ground, because during a development project, actually the lender and the developer are effectively in business together.
Yes.
Because they both want to see a successful outcome. So I don't think it necessarily matters where the lender is based, to the headquartered, but I think what's most important is the borrower has local market knowledge themselves. They understand the local area. The project that they are and the properties that they're developing are going into an area where there is demand, a liquid market that they understand. And as long as a good lender can see that that's the case, the lender will always be supportive of good people doing good projects.
That's interesting, isn't it? I mean, it is always difficult. I mean, over the years, I've heard many developers complain about their lender not understanding the market, not understanding the local situation. I see John grinning away there. You've probably experienced some of this, haven't you, John?
A little bit, yeah.
I mean,
I thought that answer was brilliant, though.
Yes.
And I haven't done business with Scott, but from an empathetic point of view and from going into business together, that's exactly the point. I've got to do all my due diligence on the project to be comfortable enough to be able to put it forward for lending. And then in Scott's position, he's actually then got to stress test that. The valuer's got to stand up to the values and test the construction costs and so on. But ultimately, if we agree that that's a good project worth doing, we go into that eyes facing forwards and
I think it's just as important. You made the point effectively around the due diligence that a lender does on a borrower, but just as important is the due diligence that a borrower does on the lender themselves.
Yep.
Because actually it's a two-way relationship that the lender and borrower are looking to establish, and that's where the most successful outcomes will come from.
Yeah.
Well, I think the other important thing is I've seen in the past before, a little bit like planning, people view the planners as the enemy. Well, don't. Go and see them, join them into what you're doing, cooperate with them, get it working on your side, work with them to achieve their aspirations. Same with lenders. People sort of view the lender as the enemy almost once it's happened, don't they?
Totally. It's much trickier from a planning point of view. I've done that. I've sat in front of planners and said, what would you like to see here?
Yeah.
And really like to try and make sure they feel they're moving the pen as well. Yeah. But it's really tricky that now, and the length of time.
Well, the trouble is it goes out of the professional hands into the amateurs on committee, doesn't it?
And they're under-resourced, and then you're dealing with one person, and then 3 months down the line they've left, someone else comes in and has a different opinion, which you won't have from a lending point of view. But you're right, working with a lender from a developer's point of view, choosing that person from the actual person themselves, let alone then their sort of criteria and so on, is so important.
It's all about relationships.
It is.
Absolutely, 100%.
Yeah, and that's one thing. That's one thing AI can't replace, because AI could do a lot of the due diligence. I mean, that's something that must be in your remit, where you could do so much stress testing and so on, but you need actually
we might have
eye contact, relationship.
We might have some fun if we got robots lending.
Well, it's really interesting. So we always say,
let's not go there.
We always say that the human touch has to be the intelligent touch, so that you actually can use data to drive information into your business, but a human being has got to see, touch and feel it in order to understand the things that AI and a computer can't pick up.
But Scott, do you think, I mean, years and years ago, the American system came in for, judging lending, tick box, what's your score? Yes, you've got it. No, you haven't. Has that totally gone now? Are we back to relationships again now?
That's a great question. I think within the specialist lending field, there are a lot more lenders that will effectively, as I said, use data to help provide information more quickly to humans that are able to then make decisions. The days of only using computers with a scorecard within specialist lending to go and make decisions, I think those are gone, because actually the best way of describing it is when you are lending, let's say it's development finance, you are backing a management team, a set of people to go and make a success of a project. The only way in which you can do that is through building a relationship with the people that you are effectively backing in business. And I don't think that a computer can ever, exactly as John was saying, I don't think a computer can ever do that.
Well, the other thing is, of course, and you just mentioned it there, we've developed over this last few years this business of specialist lenders, and I think that's a real plus in the market. You've got your buy-to-let lender, you've got your commercial lender, and these people really are experts. And again, I think it's incumbent on the developer to really take advantage of that and use that knowledge and put it to good use. And as you say, you're both in it together.
Yeah, 100%.
That way you make money.
Yeah, it goes back to choosing the lender, not the location. But ultimately, the lender's the specialist in that.
Okay, John, well, we've got a question for you. When a new development is designed, is there currently enough consideration being given to rainwater harvesting with subsequent integration into the building's water supply system? Now, I think that's a very interesting question, because we're all hot on the green economics of building these days. And this business of water is quite important, because if you talk to the Environment Agency, they'll tell you that modern drainage systems are causing a lot of trouble with floods in the rivers, because the water gets there so quickly.
So efficient.
If we can utilise it, it's got to be a good thing, hasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, the answer to the question is we're not doing enough. Why we're not doing enough? It comes down to the fact that it costs money to put in place, whether you're a developer, a new build, or you're an existing homeowner that wants to do your bit. You've got to spend, you tell me, £2,500-3,000 probably on a roof system, whether you're putting something in the ground or just using one of those big drums, depending on what you actually want to do with the water. It's going to cost you. We should all have solar panels if you've got the right roof and aspect and so on. We should all have these sustainable opportunities to help the planet, but who's paying for it? So if you put it as a question to me, I'd love to do it. But if I was going to Scott for putting a development forward, and I've got to add that sort of number on for the 10 houses that I'm doing, and we've already got inflated costs in a really tough market, can I afford to do that? So I'd like to do it. What could determine it is just how much the buyers actually want these things. If they start saying, I'm not buying a property without this and without that and without that, which is starting to happen, then I'm over a barrel. And then can the government subsidise people to put these things in place?
Was that a sort of pun? Was it over a barrel?
Yeah, a water barrel. Okay. Yeah, but it's crazy. I think Germany are sort of streets ahead of everyone. They harvest the water, and I think we use a third of our water just to flush the toilet. Yeah. So you really could go a long way towards. Well, it makes me smile though, because we're English, right? So we're always moaning about it raining, and yet I believe it was last summer after the heat wave, the reservoirs very nearly ran out of water. So there's a bigger problem, but surely we should be, harvesting the water and stopping the leaks elsewhere.
Just, John, when you're talking about costs there, just want to sort of bring Scott in on this. Scott, when you get a proposal for a development, we've got building materials inflating at a horrendous rate at the moment. You've got John there saying, well, I can look at water storage or regeneration of water or whatever else, but it costs money. How sympathetic as a lender are you to those extra requirements? Because my feeling is the valuers aren't. The valuers are not taking it into account, where they're saying, Scott, this development's valued at X. How do you cope with that?
So it's a very interesting question, and I think that a good lender will always have a broader view as to actually the product that's being created, what will the end customer want, the end buyer want? And we know from the developments that we have funded that have got fantastic green credentials, that the demand for those end products far exceeds the what the valuer is expecting the demand to be, and therefore the price is far higher. So, for example, we funded the first 3 commercially available passive houses in Scotland.
Right.
We were told on day one that the valuation of these properties on completion would be around £450,000 each. The customer ended up getting, this is before COVID, so before the cost of living crisis and before lockdowns, customer ended up getting between 650 and 665 for the properties because of the running costs of the 3 houses were so low. And I think that one of the things we need to think about is, water's expensive, electricity is expensive, gas is incredibly expensive. So when we are developing or funding the development of a development site or products that are where the costs of running the property is so much lower at the end, actually a buyer's going to say, you know what, instead of costing me £2,500 a year to run that property, it'll cost me £1,000 to run that property. So I can either pay my mortgage off more quickly or gives me more disposable income to go and enjoy a better lifestyle. And I think that there is a real push, and particularly over the past 3 years with the cost of living crisis, over particularly the last 18 months of those 3 years, as the running costs for residential homes has become, got more and more and more, actually people are looking to make savings elsewhere. And utility bills are not going to come down. They're only over time going to go in one direction. So managing those costs actually is going to equate to a product which is worth far more in a market where, ultimately in 10 years' time, whichever government wins the next election, there's going to be an increasing amount of houses built. So as a developer, you want to make sure that your product can be more demand for that product that you built.
100%.
Okay, well, on that happy note, we're going to go to a break. So thank you for the first half of the show. Join us again after the break when we'll be asking Scott and John more of your questions. Hello, welcome back to part 2 of Property Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin and I'm joined by Scott Marshall and John Reynolds. Welcome back, guys.
Thank you.
Scott, I'm selling 2 or 3 of my buy-to-let properties to fund a refurbishment and conversion project, which will provide 5 separate apartments. Can the experts advise on whether it would be possible to take out bridging finance on the project to cover me until the properties are sold, thereby allowing me to start the building works immediately? In addition, could I understand what is generally the permitted time span of a bridging loan, and would any time stipulations be flexible?
3 very good questions there. The first part is the real key to success, a successful outcome on a bridging loan or development loan, is how the transaction is structured at the outset. And a good lender absolutely will look at the wider picture, and the buy-to-let properties that are being sold, the lender should be able to cross-collateralise against the buy-to-let flats that are being sold, against the equity that's available in those properties.
Okay.
What the customer should also do is make sure that when those 5 sales go through, that they're very clear with the lender, and the lender is very clear with them as to how much net cash that's realised from each of those sales goes back to the lender, and how much is retained by the developer to make sure there's a successful outcome on the development refurbishment project that they're doing. Because actually, the reality is a lender is entitled to the full net sale proceeds from each of the 5 flats, but a good lender knows that the thing that's most important to a developer is liquidity. And a developer running out of cash during a project can have a very material adverse impact on the successful outcome of that project. So sitting down, going back to what we were saying before, building a relationship with a good lender so that you can kind of map out exactly how the cash is going to flow through the project into the scheme that's being done from the sale of the 5 buy-to-lets, is what's going to determine whether the project is successful, with a successful outcome for both developer and customer. And in terms of that, and what we've not said is whether the buy-to-let flats are mortgaged or not mortgaged. But irrespective, there should be a way of structuring the deal that works for everybody involved. So there's certainty all the way through the project.
This comes back to relationships again, doesn't it, really?
Yeah.
And I mean, so many times in the past, I've heard somebody say, "Oh, I'm not going to tell my lender this. I'm not going to tell my lender that." And then, of course, when it goes wrong, you're up a gum tree, aren't you, really?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because you just haven't been open and honest.
Yeah, I think that conversation I've had many times, and actually putting contingency in and agreeing what that contingency is, because a refurbishment is always an estimation of what it's going to cost. And the moment you start knocking walls down, and you're going to find things that you wish you hadn't. And so
absolutely.
just agreeing what that is, and whether that's potentially you advising an inexperienced developer based on what you've seen, or a developer that's got that experience that puts the right numbers in. That's a key thing, because you're right. You don't want to find that you're 80% through, and because of unforeseens and maybe some time delays that can go with that, you run out of money.
And I think it's incumbent on the lender as well to make sure that the developer has got working capital and wool in their back in order that they can have they can see it through, and they've got the cash to deal with some of the unexpected things that will come out. And one of the things that a good lender will also look at is whether the developer actually has got too many things on the go at any one time, because actually, if one of those things that you eat into the contingency and beyond, it can have a domino effect on everything else that's going on.
Well, I think one of the points John raised, the one thing people forget about is time. And, I mean, my view is most builders should be sort of buried behind walls at birth, because they never charge you what they say they're going to charge you, and they never finish in the time span they say they're going to finish in, do they?
Yeah.
So, I mean,
well, depending on what you agree with a builder, whether it's a contract or if you're managing your own team of builders, you just got to be on them. You've just got to own that, because time can slip away.
Well,
so that's part of the developer's.
I mean, Scott's
skill.
point is right. If you've got too much going on, you've got to look at the external factors which could, affect the subject matter, really.
Yeah. But then you have things that can go out of your control. So you've got the builders that can be an absolute nightmare. We live in England. I was coming out of the ground building 9 houses in Dorset, and we had swimming pools and then ice rinks for quite a long time at the beginning part of this year. Nothing I can do about that. And then the time element, of course, has an impact on everything to do with the lending.
And I think a good lender will look at the wider picture. Yeah. And I think a really good example of a developer choosing the right lender is understanding how that lender behaved during COVID, for example. Well, COVID was something that was right outside a developer's knowledge or expectations. They could not have foreseen that coming down the track. A good lender worked to support their developer customers. Some of the other lenders didn't behave in that way.
No, absolutely.
And I think that part of the due diligence that a developer should do on a lender is understanding if something does go wrong, because, as you say, when you're doing a refurbishment project, when you're doing a new build project, there's all sorts of unexpected things that go on. Yeah. How the lender will support the developer when something unexpected happens is more important than how the lender supports the customer when everything is going smoothly.
Totally agree with that.
And it's understanding these issues. And I mean, you mentioned COVID. I mean, when it first started, we thought, oh yeah, it's COVID. We've got to be careful. We've got to wash our hands and do all this sort of nonsense. But nobody started to think, well, of course, if I'm a developer, nobody's going to be allowed to come and view my properties.
Yeah.
Nobody's going to be able to go into the building society to borrow the money. Yeah.
You've got SSE connections as a developer, the amount of delays. We had the supply crisis. Yeah. That was painful as a developer. And I was flipping from what you've said. The relationship I've got with a number of the lenders that I've gone through some very good times with was really important, because I finished on time, on budget previously, and all of a sudden, it's hands up. This is going to cause us a problem. We can't even get hold of, use the example of SSE, let alone then get them to commit to a date. That's then going to hold up other things. That was really stressful. But
it's again when the government come out with these silly targets for building. I mean, they just don't take into account all these factors, do they?
No, and there's been so many. One of the things I was just, when you were talking then, the EWS1 form, which followed on the back of the Grenfell Tower. We did manage to finish a couple of buildings on time, on budget, And then we had people that wanted to buy them, and then all of a sudden this EWS1 form pops up, and we're going, what's that? Then you've got to find someone that isn't flat out and able to come and actually do the survey.
Yeah.
And it took months.
Well, I live in a block across the road here, and with that, it has one's certificate. I mean, it was crazy because nobody could sell their flats because it wasn't just your flat that had to be done. The whole development had to be done. So you had to wait for 600 inspections before you got your certificate. I mean, the government just didn't think of any of this, did
And that
they?
was an existing property. So it affected that. That was a massive issue. And so how the lender worked with developers on that, because I was not alone, was mixed. As far as I'm concerned, I was fortunate. I was working with lenders that I deliberately had a relationship with. I imagine some had some pain.
And I think that's the absolute key. So when a developer is choosing which lender to work with, whether they're going through a broker or they're working with a lender directly, price is important. Okay, but let's say that a loan is 2%, £1 million loan is 2% per annum more expensive with one lender than another. What are you actually getting, okay, for that extra 2%? It's got to be service, it's got to be speed, it's got to be relationships, it's got to be decisioning. You know, and understanding the value in paying a bit more. It's a little bit like, you know, you can drive a Dacia or a Daimler from point A to point B. Both will get you there. Both will probably get you there in the same time. But one's going to be a very pleasurable experience, and one will be a different experience.
Right. Well, experiencing that, we'll move on, I think. John, could the panel please tell me what certificates or formal assessments I should look for when considering the green credentials of a property when choosing my new home? And how can I know if sustainable construction materials have been used in the construction process?
It's a good question. And I think
have you got the answer?
There's BREEAM. I was actually trying to remember what that stands for. That's all about sustainability, the access to sustainability. But EPC rating is probably the one that everyone's going to recognise because it affects a developer or someone in an existing property. But it's not working. You know, the EPC rating, it has been brought in to try and be a one kind of magic wand solves everything. And so many things in government, it doesn't work.
It applies to 100-year-old properties as well as new. It's a totally inappropriate
and it's not
measurement.
actually achieving why it was brought in. So if I'm right, it's being updated and something that I hope really reflects a more kind of categorized system would be brought in. And then in terms of how do I check if sustainable materials are being used? That's interesting because there are some sort of stickers and tick boxes at the moment on sustainable materials that are they really, which we see in other industries. I think it goes back to kind of a conversation we've already had, which is that actually the developer in particular is trying to do a really good product to be saleable in a tough market, let alone to actually genuinely tick the box that certainly from my point of view, that I'm helping the planet and I'm saving some people over time on their bills. So you're actually showing that off. You want to volunteer that. So you're demonstrating that your timber has come from here, your steels have come from here and so on, and they are sustainable. The challenge goes with the fact that sometimes these cost more than what you can just get straight from your builders merchants and you're trying to meet costs. So I think there's certain things I certainly prioritise and quite have to then say, actually, you know, whether it's the bricks or whatever it might be, let's just get them as normal from where we normally go.
Is there not something, if you're going out and you're creating a product where the stuff that goes into the house are from a more sustainable source, actually buying the lender into that vision at the outset to say, right, here are the costs for you know, normal timber from a normal merchant. But actually what I want to use is I want to use this timber, which is 10% more expensive, but the benefits are going to be this. And the product that we've got at the end, we'll be able to sell it into a different market because our buyer is going to care about those things. And so understand, again, it's all about communication. So having that relationship with a lender to say, look, that is what I could do. That's what I am doing. These are the reasons why I'm doing it. And actually the demographic that the product, the demographic of the area that I'm building this property for is absolutely, I know that the product's going to go into a more liquid market if I can do all of those things to support that buyer.
I totally agree with that. If I was building, use the houses I mentioned in Wimborne, they're effectively barn conversions. the type of person that's buying that is absolutely all over the sustainability. If I was building 40 flats, where a lot of the materials you genuinely don't see, depending on how you finish the outside and so on, how important is that to someone that might be an aspirational product to the first-time buyer, owner-occupier?
Yeah.
They just need to get on the property ladder.
Yeah.
And that's a conversation we'd have, and ultimately about the product.
Okay, gents, that's all we've got time for, I'm afraid. So there we are. Big thank you to Scott Marshall, founder of Roma Finance. Thank you for coming in, Scott. John, thank you as ever. Property developer, investor, generally good chap. Good to have you back.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm Stephen Galpin. Join me again next time on Property Question Time. Thanks for watching.